The laughter hit her like a physical blow, sharp, cruel, and echoing with 5 years of history. Standing in the most opulent ballroom she had ever seen, Camila felt herself shrink under the weight of that sound. It was her ex-husband Carlos, his arm draped around a stunning woman in diamonds, laughing as he introduced Camila as a quaint relic from his past. In that moment, she was nothing more than a punchline, a before picture to his glorious after. He thought he had won. He thought he had buried her under the rubble of their divorce. What he didn't know was that the man who owned every brick, every crystal, and every inch of the ground they were standing on was walking right up behind her, and he was about to change the entire story. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a catalogue for artisanal tile. It was embossed on cardstock, so thick and creamy, it felt like a slab of ivory. The Nightingale Charity Gala, it announced in sweeping gold calligraphy, to be held in the celestial ballroom of the new Ethelgard Grand Hotel. For most, it was the social event of the season. For Camilla Varner, it was a battlefield. 5 years. It had been 5 years since the divorce, a chasm of time that felt both like a lifetime and a raw, recent wound. She could still hear Carlos Mitchell's final words, not shouted in anger, but delivered with the calm, cutting precision of a surgeon. "Look at this place, Ellie," he had said, gesturing around their small, lovingly decorated two-bedroom apartment. They had painted the walls themselves, a soft sage green. She had refinished the hardwood floors by hand. "It's nice. It's comfortable. And that's all you'll ever want. Comfort." "What's wrong with comfort, Carlos?" she had asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing," he sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "If you're a hobbit, I want more. I want a life that roars, not one that hums. You're humming, Ellie. I need to be with someone who roars." He had called her his cozy anchor, a compliment that was actually a condemnation. He said her lack of ambition was dragging him down, that her contentment was a cage he had to escape. He was a junior associate at a finance firm then, with eyes full of skyscrapers and a heart full of disdain for their simple life. He left her for a world of glittering surfaces, leaving her with the sage green walls that suddenly felt like they were closing in. The first year was a blur of grief and cheap wine. She was the discarded wife, the failed project. His words became her inner monologue, unambitious, small content. She hated that last word most of all. Her contentment had been love, a deep, quiet joy in building a life with him. He had twisted it into a character flaw. But then something shifted. One lonely Saturday, staring at the walls he'd mocked, she felt a flicker of defiance. She didn't just want to repaint them, she wanted to knock them down. Metaphorically at first, she quit her stable but unfulfilling job as an administrative assistant and cashed in the small savings she'd been awarded in the divorce. She enrolled in an intensive interior architecture and design program. It was brutal. She was older than most of her classmates, running on caffeine and pure spite. While they partied, she studied blueprints. While they networked, she learned about load-bearing walls and the tensile strength of steel. The ghost of Carlos's ambition haunted her, but now it propelled her. She wasn't just humming anymore. She was learning to conduct an orchestra of light, space, and form. She started small after graduating, a dental office redesign, a modern refresh for a local law firm. She poured all the love and detail she had once put into her home into her projects. She founded Varna Visionaries, a boutique design firm. Her style was unique. She didn't just decorate spaces, she curated experiences. She blended classic textures with bold modern lines, creating environments that felt both timeless and breathtakingly new. Her motto was "Locus ista sentit," this place feels. Her big break came from an unexpected source. A new ultra-luxury hotel chain, Croft Holdings, was expanding into the city. They were building the Ethelgard Grand, a monument of glass and steel. Their CEO, was a man named Zachary Croft, an enigmatic figure known for his demanding standards and impeccable taste. Every major design firm in the country was vying for the contract to design the hotel's signature suites and public spaces. Camila, with her tiny two-person firm, knew she was a long shot. But she spent a month doing nothing but preparing her pitch. She didn't just present mood boards, she presented a philosophy. She spoke of how the lobby should feel like a deep breath, how the bar should encourage clandestine whispers, and how the guest rooms should be sanctuaries from the city's relentless energy. She didn't talk about furniture, she talked about feelings. She got the job. The project had consumed her for 2 years. It was the most challenging, exhilarating, and exhausting work of her life. She worked directly with Zachary Croft, a man who was the polar opposite of Carlos. Where Carlos was loud, Zachary was quiet. Where Carlos demanded attention, Zachary commanded respect through his quiet intelligence and piercing insight. He was demanding, yes, but he saw her vision, and instead of trying to change it, gave her the resources to fully realize it. There was a mutual professional respect that felt more validating than any praise she had ever received. Now, the Ethelgard Grand was complete. The Nightingale Gala was its grand unveiling, and Camila had to be there. It was the culmination of her life's work, a testament to the woman she had become. It was also, she knew, with a knot in her stomach, exactly the kind of event Carlos would attend. He had climbed the ladder just as he'd planned. He was now a vice president at the same firm, a regular in the city's society pages. He had his roaring life. Her best friend and lead drafter Chloe was zipping up the back of her dress. It was a deep emerald silk that shimmered under the light, elegant and understated. It wasn't flashy, it was just her. "You look like you own the place," Chloe said, adjusting a strap on Camila's shoulder. Camila gave a weak smile in the mirror. "I just designed some of the rooms. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." "Details, details. You're nervous about seeing him, aren't you?" Camila didn't have to ask who he was. "I'm not nervous. I'm prepared. He's a part of my past. Tonight is about my future." But as she clipped on a pair of diamond and emerald earrings, a gift to herself purchased with the first major installment of the Ethelgard payment, she couldn't quiet the whisper of insecurity. Would he look at her and see the woman who had built this new life? Or would he only see the cozy anchor he'd so carelessly cast off? She took a deep breath, the scent of her perfume, a sophisticated blend of sandalwood and jasmine, filling the air. It was time to find out. The celestial ballroom was designed to steal your breath, and it succeeded. Camila had agonized over every detail, and seeing it come to life was a dizzying thrill. The ceiling was a vast midnight blue dome embedded with thousands of fiber optic lights that twinkled like a clear winter sky. Towering arched windows overlooked the glittering cityscape. Crystal chandeliers shaped like weeping willows dripped light onto the sea of guests dressed in their finest. The air hummed with the clinking of glasses, the low thrum of a string quartet, and the murmur of 100 conversations about money, power, and art. For a moment, Camilla felt a surge of pure, unadulterated pride. I did this. She had helped create this pocket of magic in the middle of the city. She saw Zachary Croft across the room, a pillar of calm in the swirling social eddy, speaking with the mayor. He caught her eye and gave a subtle, appreciative nod. It was enough. It grounded her. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began to navigate the room. She was here to work, in a sense, to network, to finally put a face to Varna visionaries for the city's elite. Several people, mostly architects and patrons of the arts, who had followed the Ethelgard's construction, approached her. They complimented the space, the daring use of textured velvet against raw marble, the intimate lighting. With each conversation, her confidence grew. She wasn't an ex-wife tonight. She was an artist, a professional in her element. The ghost of Carlos Mitchell began to feel distant, a faded photograph from another life. And then she saw him. He was holding court near the grand fireplace, a masterpiece of carved black marble she'd designed to be the room's anchor. Carlos hadn't just climbed the ladder, he'd vaulted up it. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than their first car. He looked handsome, polished, and utterly self-satisfied, and on his arm was the roar he'd always wanted. The woman was Isabella Rossi. Camilla knew the name, of course. The Rossis were old money, a family whose name was carved onto university buildings and museum wings. Isabella was a society darling, a philanthropist, and famously beautiful. She was wearing a strapless gown of shimmering silver, and a necklace of sapphires and diamonds glittered at her throat. She looked at Carlos with an expression of pure adoration. They were the perfect couple, a portrait of success. Camilla's heart did a painful little stutter step. She told herself it didn't matter. She had her own success, a success built of grit and talent, not connections. She turned to walk toward the terrace, needing a moment of fresh air, deciding to avoid him entirely. It was the mature, sensible thing to do, but it was too late. His eyes, sharp and predatory, scanned the crowd and locked onto her. A slow, smug smile spread across his face. He excused himself from his circle and, with Isabella in tow, began walking directly toward her. There was no escape. Camilla froze, her champagne flute feeling suddenly heavy in her hand. Her carefully constructed confidence began to crumble. She straightened her spine, a silent command to herself. Do not let him see you flinch. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Carlos said, his voice a smooth, condescending drawl. It was the same tone he used when he found a coupon she'd clipped, or when she'd suggested a vacation to a national park instead of St. Bart's. Carlos Camilla said, her voice impressively steady. It's a beautiful venue, isn't it? It's certainly something, he said, his eyes flicking around with a dismissive air as if he hadn't even noticed the design. His gaze landed back on her. He raked his eyes over her emerald dress, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, before he settled on a look of amused pity. I almost didn't recognize you without an apron on. The jab was so childish, so petty it almost made her laugh. But the intent was venomous. He wanted to remind her of the domestic life he'd scorned. He then turned to his fiancée, his arm tightening around her waist. Isabella, darling, I want you to meet someone from my past. This is Camila, my ex-wife. He said the word ex-wife as if it were a slightly embarrassing job title, like assistant manager of a failing bookstore. Isabella, to her credit, looked slightly uncomfortable. She offered a polite, if hesitant, smile. It's a pleasure to meet you, Camilla. Her voice was soft-cultured. Camilla nodded. You as well, Isabella. And then it happened. Carlos looked from Isabella, glittering and perfect, back to Camilla, standing alone. And he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a full, throaty laugh, rich with triumph. It was the laugh of a man who believed he had traded a dusty station wagon for a brand new Ferrari and had just seen the station wagon parked outside the dealership. It was a laugh that said, "Can you believe I was ever with that? Look at me now. Look what I have. And look at you. Still just you." He leaned in, a conspiratorial whisper, meant for both women to hear. Camilla used to be in charge of my domestic portfolio, he said, winking at Isabella. She was very organized. He was reducing her entire being, their entire history, into a dismissive, patronizing joke for the benefit of his new, upgraded partner. The sound of his laughter echoed in the vast, beautiful room she had created. It ricocheted off the marble and crystal, each echo a fresh stab of humiliation. Every insecurity he had ever planted in her mind bloomed at once. Small, content, unambitious, a cozy anchor. In that moment, surrounded by the greatest achievement of her professional life, she had never felt smaller. Her room suddenly felt alien and hostile. Her face burned, and she could feel the sting of tears threatening behind her eyes. She gripped her champagne flute so tightly, she was surprised it didn't shatter. She was a ghost at the feast of his success, and he was laughing at her. Humiliation is a uniquely cold fire. It burns away your composure, leaving you exposed and shivering. Camilla felt the eyes of the people nearby, the ones who had heard Carlos's booming laugh and saw the pity and awkward curiosity on their faces. She had to get away. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice a tight, thin wire. She didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel and walked, not ran toward the doors leading to the Juliet balcony, a small, private space she'd designed for precisely this reason, for a moment of quiet escape. The cool night air was a relief against her hot cheeks. Below the city was a tapestry of light, indifferent and beautiful. She rested her hands on the cold stone balustrade, took a shaky breath, and willed the tears not to fall. Crying was a victory for him. He had wanted a reaction, and she had barely managed to withhold it. She hated him for it. She hated him for being able to walk back into her life for 30 seconds and dismantle the confidence she had spent 5 years building. The emerald dress felt like a costume. The ballroom, her triumph, felt like his stage. He had defined her once again, and the definition was less than. "The view from here is my favorite." The voice was calm and low, startling her. She turned to see Zachary Croft standing in the doorway, a glass of what looked like scotch in his hand. He wasn't looking at her with pity, but at the skyline. "You have to be far enough away to appreciate the scale of it all." He continued walking to stand beside her at the balustrade. "Too close, and all you see is traffic and noise." Camilla swallowed, trying to find her professional voice. "Mr. Croft, I was just getting some air." "Zachary, please," he said, finally turning to look at her. His eyes were a startlingly clear shade of grey, and they were perceptive. He missed nothing. "Are you all right, Camilla? You left in something of a hurry." "I'm fine. Just a bit overwhelmed by the turnout." She lied the words, feeling clumsy and false. He took a slow sip of his scotch, his gaze never leaving her face. "I saw you talking with Carlos Mitchell." The name hung in the air between them. Of course, Zachary knew who Carlos was. In their world of high finance and corporate maneuvering, everyone knew everyone. Camilla just nodded, looking back out at the city. She couldn't bring herself to explain the humiliation, to give voice to how small Carlos had made her feel. "He was my ex-husband," she said quietly, the admission feeling like a confession of failure. Zachary was silent for a moment. She braced herself for the inevitable platitude, the "I'm sorry to hear that," or the awkward change of subject. Instead, he said, "His loss, then." It was so simple, so direct, that it caught her off guard. She looked at him, and for the first time she saw something beyond the powerful CEO. She saw a kindness in his eyes, a genuine empathy that was entirely at odds with the cutthroat world he dominated. "He has a way of," she trailed off, unable to find the right words, "diminishing people." Zachary supplied his voice, laced with a subtle distaste, to make himself appear brighter. "It's the oldest trick in the book for men with new money and old insecurities. I've seen him do it in boardrooms. I can only imagine how it feels when it's personal." The understanding was so complete, so instantaneous, that the tightness in Camilla's chest eased. He saw it. He saw Carlos for exactly what he was, an insecure man playing a part. He didn't see her as the pathetic ex-wife. He saw her as the target of a petty bully. "I suppose I just wasn't expecting it," she admitted, her voice stronger now. "To feel so broadsided in a room I helped create." "This isn't just a room you helped create, Camila," Zachary said, his tone shifting from gentle to firm. He gestured back toward the ballroom. "This is your vision. I am merely the man who was smart enough to fund it. The soul of this place, the light, the feel, the very air people are breathing, that's all you. You are not a guest in this hotel. In many ways, you are its heart." His words were a balm on her wounded pride. He was reframing the narrative, not with pity, but with respect. He was handing her back her power. He finished his scotch and set the empty glass down on the balustrade. Carlos Mitchell enjoys an audience. He thrives on the perception of status. It occurs to me that his current audience has an incomplete picture of the situation. A slow, dangerous spark lit in his grey eyes. He introduced you. I take it Camilla gave a bitter little laugh. As his ex-wife, the former head of his domestic portfolio, Zachary's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I see. Well, that's an introduction that requires a correction. He straightened his tie and offered her his arm. His smile was gone, replaced by a look of cool, unassailable authority. Allow me to reintroduce you, Camilla, the right way. Walking back into the ballroom on Zachary Croft's arm was a completely different experience. Before she had been navigating the room. Now, the room was navigating around them. Conversations paused. Heads turned. A path seemed to clear organically, the crowd parting like the Red Sea for Moses. Zachary didn't stride. He moved with an unhurried gravitational pull that drew all eyes. Camilla, her hand resting lightly on the fine wool of his tuxedo sleeve, felt her own posture change. Her back was straighter, her head held higher. The shame that had clung to her on the balcony evaporated, replaced by a bewildering sense of calm and anticipation. Carlos was exactly where they had left him, basking in the glow of the fireplace and the attention of a small but influential group. Camila recognized a city councilman, a prominent art critic, and the editor of a glossy lifestyle magazine. Carlos was in the middle of a story, gesturing grandly with a champagne flute, his laughter echoing again, though this time it sounded hollow to Camilla's ears. Isabella stood beside him, smiling, but her eyes kept darting around the room as if sensing a shift in the social atmosphere. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Camilla returning, and they widened even more when she registered who was with her. Carlos's story faltered mid-sentence as he followed Isabella's gaze. His smile froze on his face. He saw Camilla, and then he saw the man she was with. A flicker of confusion crossed his features, then annoyance as if he couldn't comprehend why the CEO of Croft Holdings was escorting his quaint ex-wife around the party. Zachary didn't stop until they were standing directly in front of the group. The remaining chatter died down completely. The silence was absolute, punctuated only by the distant strains of the string quartet. Councilman Zachary began nodding to the politician. Ms. Albright, he acknowledged the editor. He was calm, courteous, his tone betraying nothing but pleasantness. He then looked directly at Carlos, a cool, neutral expression on his face. Mitchell, I hope you're enjoying the evening. Zachary Carlos managed recovering quickly, puffing out his chest. He clearly assumed Zachary was there to speak with him. Fantastic event. Truly spectacular. I was just telling Isabella the scale is just... Zachary cut him off, not rudely, but with an air of purpose that made Carlos's words simply evaporate. He turned his body slightly, a subtle shift that made Camilla the focal point of the conversation. I wanted to make a proper introduction, Zachary said, his voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet. Some of you may have met Ms. Varner, but I fear you may have been given an incomplete biography. Carlos's face tightened. He knew instinctively that this was not going his way. Zachary's gaze swept over the group, warm and inclusive, before landing on Camilla with profound respect. This is Camilla Varner, founder and lead designer of Varner Visionaries. He paused, letting the name sink in. When we began the Ethelgard project, we looked at proposals from the top 20 firms in the nation. Big names, huge teams. But one proposal stood out. It spoke not of luxury, but of feeling. Not of expense, but of experience. It was visionary. He looked around the magnificent room, a slow, deliberate gesture. Everything you see, from the specific hue of the dome above you, to the way the light catches the weave in the curtains, to the very layout that encourages both grand gatherings and intimate conversations, that was all born from the mind of this woman, right here. A collective soft gasp went through the small group. The art critic's eyebrows shot up. The magazine editor leaned forward, her eyes alight with interest. She is the architectural soul of this hotel. Zachary stated, his voice quiet but resonant with absolute authority. She is without exaggeration one of the most formidable new talents in her field. We were lucky to get her. He then smiled, a genuine warm smile directed only at Camilla. The Ethelgard Grand would be just another building without her. She gave it a heart. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with recalibration, with a sudden dawning understanding. Camilla was not an ex-wife. She was not a ghost. She was the creator. Then, the magazine editor, a notoriously sharp woman named Genevieve Albright, turned a predatory smile on Carlos. "Mitchell, didn't you say she was your ex?" she asked, her tone dripping with insinuation. Carlos's face had gone from smug to confused to a pale, sickly white. The color drained from his cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Camilla, truly looked at her as if for the first time, and in his eyes was a maelstrom of shock, disbelief, and a horrifying, dawning regret. But the final crushing blow had yet to fall. The city councilman, a practical man who understood power dynamics better than anyone, looked at Zachary. "It's a magnificent property, Zachary. My compliments to your entire team. Your acquisition of the old downtown portfolio was a stroke of genius." Zachary gave a modest shrug. "We feel the city has a bright future." Isabella Rossi, who had been watching this all unfold with a look of growing horror, finally spoke, her voice thin. "I'm sorry, I'm confused. I thought the hotel was owned by the Argent Group." Zachary turned his calm grey eyes to her, and in that moment he delivered the coup de grace, so quietly, so casually, it was more devastating than any shout. "Argent is one of our subsidiaries," he explained patiently. "Croft Holdings is the parent company. I own it. All of it." He gave a small, almost imperceptible gesture that encompassed the entire breathtaking ballroom. Every brick, every chandelier, every champagne flute. The implication was immediate, brutal, and absolute. Carlos Mitchell had stood in a room owned by Zachary Croft next to the woman lauded by Zachary Croft, and had laughed at her. He had tried to humiliate the single most important person in the building, next to the owner himself. He hadn't just committed a social faux pas. He had demonstrated a catastrophic lack of judgment in front of the very people he was so desperate to impress. The laugh, that cruel, triumphant sound, it now hung in the air as the single most foolish, self-sabotaging act of the evening. The roaring life Carlos had built for himself had just been silenced by a quiet man and the woman he had thrown away. The silence that followed Zachary's quiet declaration was unlike any Camilla had ever heard. It wasn't empty. It was dense, filled with the frantic whirring of minds recalculating status and power. The air itself seemed to crackle. Carlos stood as if flash-frozen, his face a ghastly mosaic of shock and dawning horror. The smugness had not just vanished. It had been violently ripped away, leaving behind the raw, terrified insecurity of a man who has just realized he bet everything on the wrong horse and lost. The first to move was Genevieve Albright, the editor of Lux Living. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, darted from Zachary's impassive face to Camilla's composed one, then to Carlos's crumbling facade. A flicker of pure, predatory delight crossed her features. She was a connoisseur of social drama, and this was a vintage year. With a grace that was almost theatrical, she turned her back on Carlos, a gesture as decisive and brutal as a guillotine's blade, and beamed at Camilla. "Miss Varner," she gushed, her voice a warm, honeyed contralto that commanded attention. "A true pleasure. Your work is simply astonishing. I'm Genevieve Albright, editor-in-chief at Lux Living. I must confess we're doing a feature on the new vanguards of design for our winter issue, and I believe we may have just found our perfect cover story." She extended the hand, not for a handshake, but to present a crisp, impossibly elegant business card. Camilla, moving with a steadiness that felt foreign, to her own racing heart, accepted it. Thank you, Miss Albright. I'd be honored. The honor is all mine, Genevieve insisted. My assistant will call you Monday. We must capture this lightning in a bottle. With that, the spell was broken. The art critic, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, eagerly, cutting off any chance Carlos might have had to speak. Your use of chiaroscuro with the ambient lighting is masterful, Ms. Varner, a true nod to the Baroque masters, but with a distinctly modern sensibility. What were your primary influences? Suddenly, Camilla was no longer on the defensive. She was the focal point. The city councilman, the other investors, the curious onlookers, they formed a new circle. This one centered on her. They gravitated toward her, not with pity, but with a palpable electric respect. They saw her not as an appendage to a powerful man, but as a source of power herself. From within this new protective orbit, she could see the wreckage she'd left behind. Isabella, her face a mask of cold fury, was whispering venomously into Carlos's ear. Camilla couldn't hear the words, but she could see their effect. Carlos flinched, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Isabella gave him one last look of pure contempt, a look that stripped him of any remaining dignity, then turned and strode away without a backward glance. Her shimmering silver dress was like a beacon of his failure as she disappeared into the unpitying crowd, leaving him utterly devastatingly alone by the grand fireplace he no longer commanded. He was a king deposed in his own throne room, which had just been revealed to belong to another. Zachary leaned in his voice, a low murmur, meant only for her. I believe a change of scenery is in order. Would you care for a less eventful drink? Camilla gave him a grateful, shaky smile. I think I'd like that very much. He placed a hand lightly on the small of her back and guided her not toward the main bar, but through a discreet, unmarked door she knew intimately. She had designed this escape route herself. It led to the Croft Lounge, a private sanctuary reserved for Zachary and his personal guests. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, the noise of the gala vanished, replaced by a welcoming, peaceful hush. The lounge was her personal favorite space in the entire hotel. It was paneled in dark, rich walnut, with deep leather armchairs you could sink into. A single magnificent abstract painting, a swirl of deep blues, emeralds, and golds, was the only art on the walls. The lighting was low and warm, emanating from hidden sources that made the room glow. It was a space designed for quiet contemplation and sincere conversation. Zachary moved to the small, impeccably stocked bar. The sound of him pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid was the only sound. He handed her a glass of what she recognized as a very fine, single malt scotch. To Resonance, he said, his voice soft. Camilla looked at him, puzzled. Resonance? Yes, he said, settling into the armchair opposite her. Carlos Mitchell wanted a life that roared. It's a common desire for men like him. They believe success is measured in volume. They need the loud car, the loud parties, the loud declarations of their own importance. But it's all just noise. It fades quickly and leaves nothing behind. He swirled the scotch in his glass, his grey eyes thoughtful and kind. You, on the other hand, you don't roar. You resonate. Your work, this room, it has a frequency. It's quiet, but it sinks in. It affects people on a deeper level. It has substance. It lasts. He looked directly at her, his gaze holding hers. He mistook your contentment for a lack of ambition because he doesn't understand the difference between noise and power. His is a life of roaring. Yours is a life of resonance. And resonance is infinitely more powerful. His words were like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. He had taken the very core of Carlos's criticism and transformed it into a profound compliment. He hadn't just defended her, he had understood her on a fundamental level that no one, not even she herself, had ever articulated so clearly. The last vestiges of her old insecurities crumbled to dust. He never thought I'd amount to anything. She confessed the admission, now feeling less like a wound, and more like a historical fact. He saw my love for creating a home, a quiet life, as a flaw holding him back. It wasn't a flaw, Zachary stated simply. It was your talent in its infancy. You were practicing on a small scale. Now you're creating homes for hundreds of people a night. You're creating sanctuaries for the entire city. He just didn't have the vision to see it. Their conversation flowed easily after that, drifting away from Carlos and into safer, more interesting waters. They spoke of art and books, of travel, of the strange isolation that often comes with pouring your entire soul into your work. She discovered his quiet demeanor hid a surprisingly dry wit. He learned about her childhood in a small town, a detail she would have been ashamed to admit to Carlos, but which Zachary found fascinating. It was no longer a CEO and his designer. It was a man and a woman discovering a rare and wonderful harmony. Eventually, the quiet comfort of the lounge had to end. As they walked back toward the ballroom, the sound of the orchestra swelling to greet them, they saw him. Carlos was hovering near the entrance, looking haggard. His perfect tuxedo was now rumpled, his hair slightly askew. He looked like a man who had been shipwrecked. As they approached, he took a hesitant step forward, his eyes pleading. "Camilla," he started, his voice thin and raspy. Can I talk to you for a second? Please, I had no idea." Camila stopped and looked at him. She looked at the man who had shaped her, broke her, and inadvertently launched her. And she felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even the faintest glimmer of triumphant satisfaction. It was like looking at a stranger you vaguely recognized from an old photograph. The emotional charge was gone. He had no more power over her. "I don't think we have anything left to talk about, Carlos," she said, her voice perfectly calm and clear. It was not a statement of anger, but of fact. Their story had concluded. The book was closed. She didn't wait for him to respond. She simply turned and walked past him, Zachary falling into step beside her. As they re-entered the heart of the ballroom, the orchestra began to play a slow, elegant waltz. The magnificent space spun around her, a galaxy of her own creation. Zachary turned to her, a genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time that evening. "May I have this dance, Miss Varner?" he asked, the formal title, now feeling like a playful, intimate secret between them. "You may, Mr. Croft," she replied, her own smile feeling bright and completely unburdened. He led her onto the marble dance floor. As he took her in his arms, she felt a profound sense of peace settle deep in her bones. The victory wasn't in Carlos's public ruin. The victory wasn't in the business cards now tucked in her clutch. The victory was this moment, the quiet strength in her own heart, the warmth of a good man's hand in hers, and the unshakable knowledge that her worth was not a reflection in someone else's eyes, but the solid, resonant foundation of the life she had built herself. The morning after the Nightingale Gala silence reigned in the small chic office of Varna Visionaries. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a world holding its breath. Camila sat at her desk, a mug of black coffee steaming untouched in her hands, staring at the phone as if it were an unexploded bomb. Chloe, her ever-loyal friend and now de facto COO, was doing the same with her own monitor, her eyes wide. "It's been an hour," Chloe whispered, as if a loud noise might shatter the spell. "The phone hasn't rung. The email server hasn't pinged. Maybe we imagined it all. Maybe we had a collective champagne-fueled hallucination." As if on cue, the phone on Camilla's desk let out a shrill, jarring ring. Both women jumped. Camilla hesitated for a second, then picked it up, her voice a little shaky. "Varna Visionaries, Camilla speaking." The voice on the other end was breathless, belonging to the assistant of a famous hotelier from New York. He wanted to discuss a new project in Soho. While she was still processing that, her cell phone sitting on the desk began to vibrate. A text from an unknown number. It was the art critic from the party asking for a follow-up coffee. Then Chloe let out a low whistle. "Ellie," she said, her voice awestruck as she stared at her email inbox. "You need to see this." Camilla put the assistant on a brief hold and walked over. The inbox, which usually received a dozen emails a day, was flooded. The subject lines were a dizzying litany of praise and opportunity. Inquiry from the Chicago Arts Institute, collaboration proposal. West Coast Realty Group interview request. Forbes magazine, and most prominently, an email with the subject line cover story follow-up from Genevieve Albright at Lux Living. The dam had broken. The silence was replaced by a deluge. The next few weeks were a blur of fielding calls, drafting preliminary proposals, and navigating a level of attention Camilla had never imagined. Genevieve Albright's feature was the centerpiece of it all. The photo shoot didn't take place in a sterile studio, but in the Ethelgard itself. Genevieve insisted on it. She wanted Camilla in her natural element. The photographer had her stand on the Juliet balcony, where she'd sought refuge, the city lights twinkling behind her, like a conquered kingdom. He had her run a hand over the cool black marble of the fireplace, where Carlos had tried to humiliate her. It felt like reclaiming territory, planting her flag on the geography of her own past. During the interview, Genevieve, a woman with a reputation for merciless questions, was surprisingly gentle. "Forget the building for a moment, Ms. Varner," she said, her pen poised. "Tell me about the feeling you had when you first decided to start your own firm. What was the spark?" Camilla didn't speak of Carlos. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke of the desire to create spaces that felt like a sanctuary of her belief that a room could be a form of therapy. She spoke of resilience. The article that resulted was a masterpiece of narrative journalism. It portrayed her not as a victim who got lucky, but as a quiet force of nature. It concluded with a line that Camilla would never forget. In a world full of loud voices, striving to be heard, Camilla Varner has reminded us that the most powerful statements are often made in the thoughtful arrangement of light, space, and silence. She doesn't build buildings, she builds feelings. And the feeling she has built for herself is undeniably one of triumph. The article, of course, made no mention of Carlos Mitchell. His name was simply absent, an omission so complete it felt like a surgical removal. He was an irrelevant footnote edited out of the story of her and news of his own story reached her in trickles. A former colleague mentioned his engagement to Isabella Rossi had been abruptly called off. The Rossi family, whose power was as old and solid as bedrock, had no use for a man who had demonstrated such a catastrophic lack of judgment. Then, Chloe saw a small item in a trade publication. Carlos Mitchell had been reassigned to lead new market expansion, a corporate euphemism for a transfer to a less prestigious office in a city far from the roaring center of finance he so craved. Camilla felt a brief phantom pang upon hearing the news, not of satisfaction, but of a distant, melancholy pity for the ambitious young man she had once loved, who had gotten so lost in his hunger for a certain kind of life that he'd forgotten how to be a good person. Then the feeling was gone, replaced by the pressing reality of her own burgeoning future. His fate was an echo from a room she no longer occupied. Her life was now defined by her work and by the quiet, steady presence of Zachary Croft. Their relationship unfolded away from the glittering galas and society pages. It was built in the small moments. One Saturday, he took her to a sprawling architectural salvage yard outside the city, a chaotic wonderland of old doors, stained glass windows, and forgotten mantels. As she ran her hand over a heavy oak newel post, its carvings worn smooth by a century of hands, he watched her, a soft smile on his face. "What do you see?" he asked. "A story," she answered without hesitation. "I see a family's home, the sound of children running up and down the stairs. I see potential. It just needs the right place to belong again." "That's what I love about you," he said, his voice low and serious. "You don't see what's broken. You see what it could become." Another evening, he came to her apartment for dinner, the apartment Carlos had called a cozy anchor. As she cooked, Zachary walked through the space, taking in the soft sage walls. She'd never repainted the books, stacked on every available surface, the comfortable, slightly worn armchair in the corner. He stood for a long time by the window, looking out at the familiar, quiet street. "This place feels like you," he said, turning to her. "It's calm. It's thoughtful. It's a sanctuary." He had taken the very words Carlos had used as insults and turned them into the highest compliments. In that moment, a wound Camilla hadn't even realized was still there, finally completely healed. Their connection wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was the slow, deliberate construction of something meant to last. It was a foundation of mutual respect, reinforced with shared laughter and quiet understanding. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after the gala, they were walking a path along the river, the air smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. The trees were a riot of colour, their fiery leaves carpeting the ground. Camila felt a sense of profound peace, a feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. "I have a proposal for you," Zachary said, his tone shifting from casual to serious, though his eyes remained warm. Camilla's heart gave a little flutter. She smiled, teasing him. "Oh, does Croft Holdings have another building that needs a heart?" "No," he said, stopping on the path. He turned to face her fully, the golden afternoon light catching in his hair. He took both of her hands in his, their warmth a comforting anchor. "It's a much smaller project, a joint venture." He paused, his grey eyes searching hers. "I own a house upstate, on a lake. It's an old stone farmhouse, been in my family for generations, but empty for years. It's a bit neglected, frankly, but it has good bones, the kind you like. It needs new light, new life. It needs someone to see its potential. It needs a permanent vision." He squeezed her hands gently. "I was thinking," he said, his voice soft but clear, "that it needs the full-time attention of Varner and Croft, as partners, in every sense of the word." The world seemed to fall away. All she could hear was the rustle of the leaves and the steady beating of her own heart. This wasn't a grand declaration in a crowded ballroom. This was real. It was a proposal to build not just a building, but a life, to take something old and neglected and give it a future. It was their story told in the language of architecture. Tears welled in Camilla's eyes, but they were not the hot, stinging tears of humiliation she had fought back on a balcony a lifetime ago. They were tears of pure radiant joy, a joy she had designed, drafted and built from the foundations up. She thought of the woman. She was the one who hummed, instead of roared, the cozy anchor. She had learned that a quiet life didn't mean a small one. Her roar wasn't in her voice. It was in her work, in her resilience, in the empire she had quietly built while no one was watching. Her contentment wasn't a weakness. It was the bedrock upon which she had constructed her own happiness. "I think," Camilla Varnier said, her smile as bright and brilliant as the autumn sun filtering through the trees, "that I would love to take on that project." Camilla's story isn't just about revenge. It's about rewriting your own narrative. It's a powerful reminder that the most profound victory isn't seeing someone who hurt you fall. It's rising so high that you can no longer even see them. Her triumph wasn't the moment her ex was humiliated, but the moment she realized his opinion no longer mattered. She didn't need a prince to save her. She became the queen of her own kingdom, built with her own two hands. Her story proves that true power isn't loud or flashy. It's the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. If you've ever felt underestimated or defined by someone else's small-minded view of you, let this story be your fuel. If it resonated with you, please smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories of triumph and poetic justice. What did you think of Zachary's epic move? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.
Have you ever felt invisible, like a ghost watching the world celebrate a life you can only dream of? For Chloe Evans, a young caterer working the wedding of the century, that was her reality. She was there to serve champagne and disappear into the background. But she held a secret, a small locket that connected her to the powerful Sterling family in a way no one could imagine. In a world of Vera Wang gowns and Cartier diamonds, she was a forgotten promise. What happens when the most powerful man in the room, the billionaire Alexander Sterling, stops the wedding, exposes a stunning lie, and turns to the invisible girl to make a declaration that will shatter their world? This isn't a fairy tale. This is a story of secrets, betrayal, and a choice that will change everything. The air at Oheka Castle wasn't just air. It was a curated atmosphere of wealth, a thick, fragrant fog of money that clung to the damask curtains and settled in the hand-carved moldings. It smelled of hothouse roses, expensive perfume, and entitlement. For Chloe Evans, it was suffocating. She stood near the grand ballroom's entrance, one of a dozen anonymous servers dressed in a starched black uniform that felt more like a costume than clothing. Her job was simple: hold a silver tray of champagne flutes, smile blankly, and be invisible. For $200 and a shared van ride back to Queens, she was supposed to be a silent cog in the machine of the year's most anticipated social event, the wedding of Ethan Sterling and Victoria Davenport. The Sterlings weren't just rich, they were a dynasty. Their name was etched onto skyscrapers in Manhattan, philanthropic wings of museums, and the Forbes list for as long as anyone could remember. The Davenports, while not in the same league, boasted old money and a lineage that they claimed traced back to the Mayflower, a fact Victoria mentioned with grating frequency. The union was less a marriage and more a merger of empires, a story splashed across the pages of Vogue and Town and Country. Chloe's eyes scanned the crowd. Women drifted by in jewel-toned silks and chiffon, their laughter like the tinkling of tiny, sharp bells. Men in bespoke tuxedos stood in tight, powerful clusters, discussing markets and mergers in low, confident rumbles. They were a different species, moving with an effortless grace that came from a lifetime of knowing the world was their playground. Chloe's own shoes, sensible black flats she'd bought at Payless, suddenly felt a size too small. Her hands, holding the heavy silver tray, were chapped from dish soap and hard work, a stark contrast to the manicured fingers and flashing diamonds that reached for her champagne. A wave of nausea rolled over her. It wasn't just the nerves or the oppressive opulence. It was the crushing weight of memory. The last time she'd been in the presence of the Sterling family, she had been a child, clutching her mother's hand, standing in the shadow of a different grand house, a house where a promise had been made, a promise that had died along with Richard Sterling. "You, girl." The voice was sharp, cutting through the ambient hum like a shard of glass. Chloe flinched, turning to find Victoria Davenport, the bride herself, glaring at her. Victoria was stunning, a masterpiece of artifice in a cloud of Vera Wang lace, her blonde hair swept into an intricate chignon from which not a single strand dared to escape. But her beauty was glacial. Her blue eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a chilling emptiness. Beside her stood her mother, Beatrice Davenport, a woman who looked as if she'd been carved from marble in disapproval. "Yes, miss?" Chloe murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "This glass has a smudge," Victoria said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at a flute on Chloe's tray. It was a minuscule imperfection, likely a water spot Chloe had missed while polishing the 100-plus glasses earlier. "I am so sorry, Miss Davenport." "Let me get you another," Chloe said, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Beatrice scoffed, a dry, rustling sound. "Sorry? Girl, do you have any idea how much this event costs per minute? Every detail is supposed to be perfect. My daughter's wedding day, and she is being served from smudged glassware by this." She gestured vaguely at Chloe, as if she were a piece of faulty equipment. "It's fine, Mother," Victoria said, though her tone was anything but. She took a different glass from the tray, her eyes raking over Chloe from head to toe. It was a look of casual dismissal, a look that said, "You are nothing. Just try not to ruin anything else. The staff is supposed to be invisible, not incompetent." A few nearby guests had turned to watch the exchange, their faces a mixture of mild amusement and pity. Chloe felt their stares like pinpricks on her skin. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. She nodded mutely, her gaze fixed on the floor, waiting for them to move on. As they turned away, Victoria's lace train swept dangerously close to a small side table, holding a floral arrangement. Chloe saw it happening in slow motion, the delicate fabric catching on the table's edge. Without thinking, she reached out, a purely instinctual movement to prevent the vase from toppling. Her hand brushed against Victoria's arm. Victoria recoiled as if she'd been burned. She let out a small theatrical gasp and spun around, her face a mask of fury. "Did you just grab me?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "No, I, the vase, I was just—" Chloe stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Don't touch me. You have no idea who I am. You have no right to put your filthy hands on me." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and loud. The circle of onlookers widened. Beatrice's face hardened. "Security should be called. She assaulted my daughter." "It was an accident," a deep voice stated, cutting through the tension with calm authority. Heads turned. Alexander Sterling, the groom's older brother, had appeared as if from nowhere. He was taller than his brother Ethan, with a presence that seemed to suck all the oxygen from his immediate vicinity. While Ethan had a boyish charm, Alexander was all sharp angles and quiet intensity. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his custom-tailored tuxedo fit him like a second skin, and his eyes, a deep, penetrating gray, missed nothing. He was the true power behind the Sterling name, the ruthless CEO who had doubled the family's fortune. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it never quite reached his eyes. He was looking directly at Chloe, but his words were for Victoria. "I saw what happened. She was preventing the flowers from falling. You should thank her." Victoria's jaw tightened. Being contradicted was not an experience she was familiar with, especially not by her future brother-in-law. "Alexander, she's just a server. It's not her place." "It's her place to do her job," Alexander said, his voice flat and final. He didn't raise it, but the command was absolute. He held Victoria's gaze for a moment, and in that silent battle of wills, she was the first to look away, her cheeks flushed with anger. Alexander's gray eyes then flickered to Chloe. For a split second, his gaze dropped to her neck, where a thin, worn silver chain was tucked beneath the collar of her uniform. Chloe's hand instinctively flew to the spot, covering the small heart-shaped locket that rested there. It was a subconscious, protective gesture. His eyes met hers again, and for an instant, she saw something unreadable in their depths, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps something else entirely. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. Without another word, he turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd as silently as he had arrived. The confrontation was over. The guests, sensing the drama had concluded, turned back to their conversations. Beatrice guided her daughter away, muttering about the quality of hired help. Chloe was left standing alone, her body trembling, her tray of champagne forgotten. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the unnerving intensity of Alexander Sterling's gaze. He hadn't just offended her, he had seen her. And in that brief charged moment, she had the terrifying feeling that he had seen more than just a poor girl in a server's uniform. He had seen the secret she carried, the one nestled in a tarnished silver locket, right against her heart. The locket was warm against her skin, a constant, familiar weight. It was the only piece of her mother she had left. Inside, on one side, was a faded, postage stamp-size photo of her mother, Sarah Evans, her smile radiant and full of a life Chloe had only heard stories about. On the other side, protected by a sliver of plastic, was not a photo, but a tiny folded piece of paper. On it, in elegant, masculine script, were 4 words, "For my 2 Sarahs." Chloe had never known who the second Sarah was. Her mother, whenever asked, would just smile a sad, wistful smile and say, "He had a big heart, sweetheart. Room for all sorts of dreams." He was Richard Sterling, the patriarch, Alexander and Ethan's late father. He wasn't Chloe's father in blood, but he had been the central pillar of her mother's world. They had met when Sarah Evans, a struggling art student with a talent that burned brighter than her prospects, had been commissioned to paint a mural in a community center funded by Sterling Industries. Richard, A man who appreciated beauty in all its forms, from a soaring stock market to a perfect brushstroke, had been captivated by her spirit in her art. A deep, platonic friendship blossomed. He became her patron, her mentor, her confidant. He funded her first gallery show and bought the largest canvas for a price that made her weep with gratitude. When she found herself pregnant from a fleeting, disastrous relationship with a man who vanished the moment he heard the news, Richard had stood by her. He had paid for her hospital bills, found her the small, sunny apartment in Queens where Chloe grew up, and made a solemn promise. "I will always look after you and your little girl, Sarah," he had sworn, his hand over hers. "You are family." He had given Sarah the locket on the day Chloe was born. It was his promise made tangible, a silver heart to symbolize his commitment. For the first 10 years of Chloe's life, Richard Sterling was a warm, intermittent presence. He would arrive in his sleek black car, smelling of expensive cologne and kindness, bringing Swiss chocolates for her and rare art books for her mother. He would take them for walks in Central Park, treating Chloe with the same gentle affection he showed his own sons, whom Chloe only ever saw in photographs. Then everything changed. Richard died suddenly, a massive heart attack on the golf course. He was 58. The stream of kindness, of security, of Swiss chocolate and rare books dried up overnight. Her mother had tried to reach out to his widow, Genevieve Sterling. She wrote a heartfelt letter of condolence, reminding Genevieve of Richard's promise. The response, when it finally came, was a check for $5,000, enclosed in a crisp envelope with a letter typed by a lawyer. It was, the letter stated, a final discretionary gift to sever any and all informal ties. There was no mention of Richard's promise, no acknowledgement of the years of friendship. The message was clear. You are not our kind. You are not our problem. The rejection broke something in Sarah Evans. Her vibrant spirit began to fade, the light in her eyes dimming. The art supplies gathered dust. She took on more menial jobs, her hands, once destined to create beauty, becoming rough from cleaning other people's houses. The fight went out of her, replaced by a quiet, lingering sadness. She died 5 years later, not from a specific illness, but from what Chloe had always thought of as a broken heart. Before she passed, she pressed the locket into Chloe's hand. "Go to them one day," she'd whispered, her voice frail. "Not to ask for anything, just to show them this, to remind them that a promise was made, so it isn't forgotten completely." For years, Chloe couldn't bring herself to do it. The memory of the lawyer's letter was a wall of ice. Why would she subject herself to that kind of humiliation? The Sterlings had moved on. They lived in a world so far removed from hers that it might as well have been another planet. But when she'd seen the announcement for Ethan Sterling's wedding in a newspaper she was clearing from a table at the diner where she worked, her mother's last wish had echoed in her mind. A new catering company she freelanced for, Elegant Events, was hiring extra staff for a massive event at Oheka Castle. On a wild, desperate impulse, she had applied. Getting the job felt like a sign, a cruel twist of fate pushing her toward a moment she had spent 8 years avoiding. So here she was, not to beg, not to demand, just to fulfill a deathbed promise. Her plan, if it could be called that, was simple. Find a quiet moment, perhaps approach Genevieve Sterling, the matriarch, show her the locket, and walk away. A final, silent testament to a promise broken. But the encounter with Victoria and the unexpected intervention from Alexander had rattled her. Alexander. He had been a boy in the photos, a serious-faced teenager standing beside his smiling father. Now he was a man who commanded rooms without raising his voice, and he had looked at her locket. Could he know? Did his father ever speak of them? The pre-ceremony reception was winding down. The guests were being ushered towards the formal gardens, where the ceremony itself would take place under a canopy of white roses. Chloe and the other servers began the Sisyphean task of clearing the hundreds of abandoned glasses. As she stacked flutes onto her tray, she saw Genevieve Sterling standing near the terrace, speaking with an older couple. This was it. It was now or never. Her heart hammered. Her palms grew slick with sweat. This was a terrible idea. She was a server. She would be fired on the spot. A promise was made. So it isn't forgotten completely. Her mother's voice was a whisper in her soul. Bolstering her courage, Chloe placed her tray on a nearby table, wiped her palms on the sides of her uniform, and took a tentative step forward. Then another. She was 10 feet away when a hand clamped down on her arm. She gasped, spinning around to face her manager, a harried woman named Maria. "Evans, what do you think you're doing?" Maria hissed, her eyes wide with panic. "The ceremony is starting. We need to be prepping the dinner service, not loitering." "Did Mrs. Davenport complain about you again?" "No, I just needed a moment," Chloe stammered, the opportunity dissolving like smoke. "You can have a moment on your own time. This isn't your time. This is their time. Move it. Now!" Maria's voice was sharp with the stress of the event. Defeated, Chloe nodded and followed her manager back towards the cacophony and sweltering heat of the kitchens. As she passed through the service door, she cast one last look over her shoulder. Genevieve Sterling was gone, having moved with the rest of the guests towards the garden. The moment was lost. Through a small leaded glass window that looked out onto the gardens, Chloe could see the scene unfolding. The guests were seated in rows of white chairs. Ethan stood at the altar, looking handsome and nervous. Victoria was gliding down the aisle on her father's arm, a vision in white. It was a perfect fairy tale, and Chloe was where she belonged, out of sight, in the noisy, frantic world of the help, with a cold silver locket and the ghost of a broken promise. The kitchen was a controlled inferno. Chefs barked orders over the roar of industrial fans and the clang of steel on steel. The air was thick with the smells of roasting duck, truffle oil, and simmering anxiety. For Chloe, the chaos was a strange comfort, a physical manifestation of the turmoil inside her. She focused on the task Maria assigned her, arranging microgreens on hundreds of salad plates, filling water pitchers, polishing yet more silverware, losing herself in the mindless repetition. Through the service doors, they could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the ceremony, the string quartet, the officiant's solemn tones, the murmur of the crowd. Each sound was a reminder of the world she was excluded from, the life her mother had dreamed of for her, a life of security and belonging. "All right, listen up," Maria shouted, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. "They'll be at the vows any minute. Once they're pronounced man and wife, the cocktail hour on the West Terrace begins. We have exactly 60 minutes to flip the ballroom for dinner. Trays ready, people. Move, move, move." Chloe's station was near the same service door as before, the one with the small window. She couldn't help but steal glances, catching fragments of the scene. She saw Victoria and Ethan facing each other, hands joined. She saw Genevieve Sterling in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, a perfect portrait of a proud mother. The officiant's voice rose, carrying more clearly now. "If anyone can show just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." It was the most famous line in any wedding, a piece of theatrical tradition that no one ever took seriously. There was always a polite, expectant pause, followed by the continuation of the ceremony. Chloe watched, a dull ache in her chest. The pause stretched. 1 second, 2, 3. It grew heavy, awkward. Guests began to shift in their seats, exchanging confused glances. From her vantage point, Chloe could see Ethan's smile falter slightly. Victoria's grip on his hands tightened. And then, a figure rose from the front row. It was Alexander Sterling. A collective gasp rippled through the garden. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. He didn't walk towards the altar. He simply stood, a tall, dark silhouette against the manicured greenery. He looked calm, composed, as if he were about to address a boardroom, not interrupt a wedding. "Alexander, what is the meaning of this?" Genevieve's voice was a furious whisper, easily audible in the sudden, dead silence. "Sit down this instant." Alexander ignored her. His gaze was fixed on his brother. "Ethan," he said, his voice resonating with quiet power, amplified by the officiant's microphone, "I cannot let you do this." Ethan stared at his brother, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. "Alex, what are you talking about? This is my wedding." "I'm not objecting to you getting married," Alexander clarified, his voice cool and precise. "I am objecting to you marrying her." He turned his head slightly and his cold gaze fell upon Victoria, or more specifically, her family. Victoria's face, already pale, turned ashen. "How dare you? Alexander, you are ruining my wedding day." "Your wedding day?" Alexander replied, a humorless smile touching his lips. "Or the Davenport family's last-ditch effort to avoid financial ruin?" The words dropped like stones into the silent pool of the garden. The shock was palpable. Beatrice Davenport shot to her feet. "This is slander. Vicious, baseless lies. My husband will sue you into oblivion." "Will he?" Alexander asked softly. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, the massive screens on either side of the altar, which had been displaying a tasteful E and V monogram, flickered to life. Instead of a romantic photo montage, a series of documents appeared, magnified for all to see. Bank statements, overdue loan notices, default warnings, emails. The emails were the most damning. A chain between Victoria and her father, discussing in cold clinical terms the necessity of the Sterling merger to gain access to the family's credit lines. One email from Victoria was particularly chilling. "Don't worry, Daddy. Once I have the ring on my finger, Ethan will do anything I say. His brother is the problem, but he's too emotionally stunted to interfere with something like this. We will have our bailout." The garden erupted. The whispers turned into a roar of shock and scandal. Guests were pulling out their phones. The quiet, elegant affair instantly transformed into a media circus. Ethan looked from the screens to Victoria, his face crumbling with dawning horror and heartbreak. "Tori, is this true?" Victoria's composure finally shattered, her face contorted with rage. "He's twisting things. It's just business talk. You know how families like ours operate." "Yes," Alexander's voice cut through her frantic defense. "I know exactly how families like ours operate, and we do not tolerate parasites." He turned to the head of his security detail, a large man who had moved to his side. "Walter, please escort the Davenports off the premises." "You can't do this!" Beatrice shrieked as Walter and another guard approached them. "This is our event. We are the hosts." "Your family's hosting privileges were revoked the moment you tried to defraud mine," Alexander said, his voice like ice. The scene descended into utter chaos. The Davenports were shouting, crying, threatening lawsuits. Photographers who had been hired to capture romance were now capturing the socialite train wreck of the decade. Ethan just stood there, shell-shocked, a groom left at an altar that had become a stage for his own humiliation. Back in the kitchen, the catering staff was frozen, watching the drama unfold through the window and on a small monitor that had been set up to time the courses. Maria was pale, her carefully planned schedule in tatters. Chloe felt a strange, dizzying mix of emotions. There was shock, of course, but there was also a grim, terrible sense of vindication. The woman who had looked at her like she was dirt was being exposed in the most public way imaginable. Yet, watching Ethan's devastated face, she felt a pang of pity. He was a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The Davenports were finally removed, their protests fading as they were led away. A stunned, morbid silence fell over the remaining guests. The wedding was over. The day was in ruins. And then Alexander Sterling did something no one expected. He turned his back on the chaos at the altar, on his stunned mother and his broken brother. His eyes scanned the crowd, passing over the hundreds of wealthy, important faces. He walked off the dais and onto the grass, moving with a calm, deliberate purpose. He walked past the rows of guests, past the floral arrangements, his path leading directly toward the side of the house, directly towards the service entrance, directly towards the small window where Chloe stood, her hand clamped over her mouth, watching the impossible unfold. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them. The cacophony of the scandal, the guests' frantic whispers, the clicking of cameras, the distant wail of a furious Beatrice Davenport, faded into a dull, irrelevant roar. All Chloe could hear was the frantic, panicked drumming of her own heart. All she could see was Alexander Sterling, a man of impossible power and wealth, walking directly towards her. He wasn't supposed to know she was there. No one was. She was part of the invisible army that made events like this happen. But his eyes, a stormy, unreadable gray, were locked on hers through the glass. There was no doubt. He was coming for her. Her mind raced, a frantic scramble of confusion and fear. Was he coming to fire her? To blame her for the earlier scene with Victoria? Had her simple attempt to fulfill her mother's promise somehow triggered this cataclysm? It didn't make sense. He stopped just outside the service door. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at her through the window. It felt like an eternity. Then he pulled the door open. The humid, fragrant air of the garden rushed into the sterile, anxious atmosphere of the kitchen. A few of the other servers gasped. Maria looked like she was about to faint. Chloe stood frozen, pinned by his gaze. Her apron suddenly felt flimsy, her uniform a pathetic shield. Her whole body was trembling. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a soft-spoken command, yet it carried the weight of an unshakable decree. "Me?" Chloe squeaked, her voice barely audible. "Yes, you," he confirmed, his expression unreadable. I'm working," she stammered, gesturing uselessly at the salad plates around her. It was the most absurd, most inadequate response imaginable. A flicker of something, impatience, amusement, crossed his face. "Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Now come with me." He didn't wait for her to agree. He reached in, his hand gently but firmly closing around her arm. His touch was warm, a startling contrast to his icy demeanor. It sent a jolt through her, part fear, part something else she couldn't name. He drew her out of the kitchen and into the unreal theater of the ruined wedding. The moment she stepped into the garden, hundreds of pairs of eyes swiveled to her. A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Who was this? The caterer? The girl Victoria had screamed at? The sudden, intense focus of so many people was a physical blow. Chloe shrank back, her instinct to be invisible screaming at her to run, to hide. But Alexander's grip was resolute. He was an anchor in the swirling sea of confusion. He led her through the stunned guests who parted before them as if he were royalty. He didn't lead her away, towards an exit. He led her straight back towards the altar. Chloe's mind couldn't process what was happening. Her cheap, sensible flats trod upon a carpet of white rose petals that had been meant for Victoria. She was walking down the aisle of a wedding she was meant to serve, on the arm of a man who had just destroyed it. When they reached the dais, he finally stopped. He stood beside his brother, who was staring at Chloe with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Genevieve Sterling looked at her with pure, unadulterated loathing. Alexander turned to face the assembled crowd. He still held Chloe's arm, a gesture of possession that was both terrifying and strangely protective. "I apologize for the unpleasantness," he began, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily over the hushed garden. "It is a regrettable but necessary day for the Sterling family, a day of excising a poison before it could fully infect us." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he looked down at his brother. "Ethan, you were deceived. Your heart was used as collateral in a business transaction. That is a wound that will take time to heal, and you will have all the support of your family to do so." He then turned his gaze to his mother. "Mother, our family's legacy, the one father built, is founded on integrity and strength, not on advantageous but hollow alliances. We have been reminded of that today." His words were a public dressing down, delivered with surgical precision. Finally, he turned his gaze back to the crowd, to the sea of bewildered faces. And then he looked down at Chloe. Her heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. She was trembling so hard she was surprised she was still standing. His grip on her arm was the only thing keeping her upright. "My family will not be welcoming a liar today," Alexander announced, his voice ringing with authority. "But it will be welcoming a bride." A stunned silence. 1,000 minds trying and failing to comprehend what he had just said. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. This was a nightmare, a surreal, waking nightmare. He couldn't possibly mean. Alexander shifted his position slightly, turning to face her more directly. He gently released her arm, only to take her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. In front of his family, his friends, his business rivals, and the ravenous press, the billionaire Alexander Sterling focused the entire force of his attention on the terrified girl in the server's uniform. My father, Richard Sterling, was a man of his word, he said, his voice softer now, yet still carrying to every corner of the garden. He made a promise to a woman he respected and admired, Sarah Evans, a promise that he would always protect her and her daughter. He looked directly into Chloe's eyes. He made a promise that our family would protect you, Chloe. I am the head of this family now, and the promises of a Sterling are not so easily broken. He raised her hand, the one that was rough and chapped from work, and held it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. I am honoring my father's promise. I am making you a Sterling. I am giving you my name, my resources, my protection. Today, he declared, his voice rising again to its full commanding power, you become my wife. The world exploded. If the previous moment had been chaos, this was pandemonium. A tidal wave of noise and motion crashed over them. The guests were on their feet, a surging mass of disbelief. Phones were not just raised, they were thrust forward, a forest of lenses capturing the impossible tableau on the altar. Flashbulbs went off like strobes in a nightclub, blinding Chloe and casting the scene in a series of stark, fractured images. Alexander, have you lost your mind? Genevieve's shriek was sharp enough to shatter glass. She rushed forward, her face a mask of incandescent rage. But Walter, the head of security, stepped smoothly in her path, a granite wall of quiet denial. Ethan, finally shaken from his stupor, lunged at his brother. What are you doing? Is this some kind of sick joke? You ruined my life, and then you do this? He yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and fury. Alexander didn't even flinch. He simply moved, placing himself squarely between Ethan and Chloe, shielding her with his body. This is not about you, Ethan, he said, his voice dangerously low. This is about a debt of honor. Go inside, cool off. We will speak later. A debt of honor? With a server? Ethan spat, the word dripping with the same condescension Victoria had used earlier. The word struck Chloe with the force of a slap. It was what she was. It was how they all saw her. A uniform. A function. Not a person. She felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. Alexander's jaw clenched. Do not speak about her that way, he ordered, a quiet menace in his tone that made Ethan, for all his blustering, take a half step back. He turned to Walter. Get my brother inside, and my mother, and clear this garden. The event is over. Give the press a short statement. The wedding was canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. That's all. His security team moved with terrifying efficiency. The guests, sensing the family implosion was now becoming a private matter, began a hasty chattering retreat, eager to escape, but even more eager to gossip. Genevieve and Ethan were firmly but respectfully escorted back toward the castle, their protests swallowed by the general exodus. Within minutes, the garden was eerily empty, save for the debris of a party that never happened. Overturned chairs, discarded programs, and thousands of crushed white roses. Chloe stood on the dais with Alexander, the silence ringing in her ears. She was still reeling, her mind a blank canvas of shock. My wife. The words echoed and re-echoed, nonsensical and terrifying. Are you all right? Alexander asked, his voice returning to a normal, almost gentle tone. Chloe couldn't speak. She just stared at him, trying to find some hint of an explanation in his impassive face. Was he insane? Was this some cruel, elaborate punishment for Victoria? Her trembling became uncontrollable. The world tilted on its axis, the edges of her vision going dark. The ground seemed to rush up to meet her. Whoa, he said, his hands shooting out to steady her, his grip strong and sure on her upper arms. Okay, let's get you out of here. He led her away from the altar, not back towards the chaos of the kitchen, but around the side of the castle to a private stone patio she hadn't known existed. It overlooked a serene pond, a world away from the drama on the other side. A sleek black Audi was parked nearby, humming silently. He guided her to a wrought iron bench and had her sit down. He took off his tuxedo jacket, the fabric impossibly soft, and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled faintly of him. A clean, expensive scent of cedar and something uniquely masculine. The gesture was so unexpectedly kind it brought tears to her eyes. I know this is, he started, then paused, searching for the word. The shock. Chloe let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. A shock? A shock is when you find a $20 bill in your pocket. I don't even know what this is. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for an explanation. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you say that? He sat beside her on the bench, not too close, but near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. He stared out at the pond for a long moment before he spoke. I told you, I'm honoring my father's promise. By announcing you're marrying a stranger who serves you champagne? She asked, her voice shaking. That doesn't honor him. That makes you look crazy. It was the only way, he said simply, turning to face her. His gray eyes were serious, intense. The Davenports were a threat. I've known for months about their financial situation, about their plan. I was gathering evidence to convince Ethan to call it off, but he was blinded by Victoria. He wouldn't listen to reason. The only way to stop it was to detonate it publicly, to make it impossible for them to recover. Chloe's mind was starting to clear, just enough to follow his cold logic. So you ruined them, to protect your brother. To protect my family, he corrected. But that created a new problem, a massive scandal. The press would have a field day. Sterling heir jilted at altar. It would follow Ethan for years. It shows weakness. Our stock would likely take a hit tomorrow morning. In my world, perception is reality. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. I had to change the narrative. Immediately. I couldn't just cancel a wedding. I had to replace it with something bigger, something no one could have predicted. Chloe stared at him, the horrifying scale of his plan dawning on her. Me. I'm the new narrative. You are, he confirmed. The story is no longer about a failed alliance with the Davenports. The story is now about the enigmatic Alexander Sterling, who exposed a fraudulent family and, in an act of incredible honor and romance, elevated a humble, hard-working girl with a secret tie to his family's past, a girl his father had promised to protect. It's a story of loyalty, of honor, of a promise kept beyond the grave. It's a fairy tale, and the press, the public, they will devour a fairy tale far more eagerly than a scandal. It was brilliant, and it was monstrous. He had used her as a strategic tool, a pawn in his corporate and social chess game. And what about me? She whispered, the jacket feeling heavy on her shoulders. What happens to the humble, hard-working girl after the press gets their story? This was the moment he would tell her it was all a ruse, a lie to save face. He would give her some money, send her on her way, and she would disappear back into obscurity. That, he said, his voice dropping, is up to you. But my offer is real. Chloe's head snapped up. Real? You can't be serious. You don't want to marry me. As a matter of fact, I do, he stated with the same conviction he'd used to discuss stock prices. Chloe, I saw the locket earlier. I recognized it. My father showed it to me once, a long time ago. He told me about your mother, about his promise. When I saw you and I saw how Victoria treated you, I knew I couldn't let my father's legacy be one of broken promises, replaced by a union with a family of vipers. He continued, his logic relentless. This is a contract, a marriage of convenience. You would have the Sterling name, my protection. You would never have to worry about money or security or people like Victoria Davenport ever again. Your life would change completely. In return, you provide the solution to my current problem, and you help me honor the single most important promise my father ever made. You help me restore integrity to my family's name. He was offering her the world, a golden cage, but a world she could barely imagine. A world without leaky faucets, ramen noodle dinners, and the constant gnawing fear of not making rent. And if I say no? She asked, her voice trembling. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his armor of certainty, a flicker of something vulnerable. If you say no, he said quietly, I will give you enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life, and I will have my driver take you wherever you want to go. The story will be that you were overwhelmed and refused my proposal. It will be messier, but I will not force you. He was giving her a choice, a real choice. Her entire life, Chloe had never had a choice. She had been swept along by poverty, by tragedy, by circumstance. Now the most powerful man she had ever met was laying two paths at her feet. One led back to her old life. The other led to a future that was both dazzling and terrifying. She looked at his hand, the one that had held hers at the altar. It was a strong hand, a capable hand, a hand that could build empires and destroy them. She thought of her mother, of her last wish. A promise was made. Alexander Sterling was offering to keep it in the most insane, dramatic way possible. But he was offering. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Chloe looked up and met his gaze. The silence on the stone patio stretched, thick with unspoken questions and the weight of a life-altering decision. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the edge of the pond. Alexander didn't press her. He simply waited, his patience a testament to his confidence. He had laid his cards on the table, and now the next move was hers. Chloe's mind was a whirlwind. Her old life, the one of scrimping and saving, of constant low-grade anxiety, was a known quantity. It was hard, but it was hers. This new life he was offering, it was a phantom, a world of unimaginable luxury and suffocating expectations. She would be a fraud, a caterer playing the part of a billionaire's wife. Genevieve Sterling would despise her. The world would watch her every move, waiting for her to stumble. But then she thought of the alternative, walking away, taking his money and returning to her tiny apartment in Queens. She would be financially secure, yes, but she would still be alone. The memory of this day would haunt her, a bizarre fever dream. The promise made to her mother would remain a footnote, a story that ended with a payoff instead of being honored. And there was something else. In Alexander's cold, calculating explanation, she had seen a glimpse of the man beneath the CEO. He had spoken of his father's promise not as a burden, but as a sacred duty. He had shielded her from his brother's anger. He had draped his own jacket over her shoulders. These were not the actions of a monster. They were the actions of a man, however ruthless, who lived by a code, a strange, severe, but undeniable code of honor. For the first time in a very long time, Chloe felt a flicker not of fear, but of fascination. Who was this man who could orchestrate such beautiful, terrible chaos? This contract, she began, her voice steadier now. What are the terms? A small, almost imperceptible sign of relief registered in Alexander's eyes. He had won. The terms are simple. In public, we are a devoted couple. We attend functions, we support each other, we present a united front. In private, we can have separate lives, separate rooms. I will not ask anything of you that you are not willing to give. This is about protection and partnership, not romance. A partnership, she repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. Exactly. You will have access to my resources to pursue whatever you wish. An education, a business, a charity. Your life will be your own. Your only duty is to be my wife, in name and in public perception. She looked down at her hands, twisting a loose thread on her server's apron. She thought of her mother's dusty art supplies, of the dreams she had abandoned, an education, a life without fear. It was a seductive offer, a devil's bargain perhaps, but the devil was wearing a bespoke suit and offering her the keys to the kingdom. Okay, she whispered, the single word feeling like the biggest gamble of her life. He nodded slowly as if sealing the deal. Okay. There was no handshake, no signed document, just a quiet understanding that passed between them on a secluded patio, as the wreckage of another life settled just out of sight. He stood up and extended a hand to her. This time, when she took it, it felt different. It was no longer the hand of a stranger, but the hand of her partner, her husband. The thought was still dizzying. We can't stay here, he said. My mother will be regrouping. The press, despite my instructions, will be lurking. We leave now. Leave? To where? She asked, her mind still struggling to keep up. My apartment? I need to. I have clothes, my things. He gave her a look that was almost pitying. Chloe, you will never have to go back to that apartment unless you choose to. I have a penthouse in the city. It's secure. That will be our home. As for your things, send my assistant a list, and she will have anything you want delivered by morning. Anything you wish to retrieve personally can be arranged later. It was happening so fast. He was erasing her old life with a few quiet words. He led her to the gleaming black Audi, the door opening with a soft click. As she slid onto the buttery leather seat, still wearing his tuxedo jacket over her cheap uniform, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the tinted window. She looked like a child playing dress-up, a stray who had wandered into a palace. Alexander got in beside her, and the car pulled away with a silent, electric hum. As they drove down the long, winding driveway of Ohika Castle, leaving the scene of her past and future collision behind, Chloe clutched the locket through the fabric of her uniform. This wasn't a fairy tale. Fairy tales were simple, their endings happy and assured. This was complicated. It was a business deal wrapped in a scandal, a rescue mission disguised as a wedding proposal. She was a girl from Queens who was about to live in a penthouse, married to a billionaire she had met only hours before. She was terrified. She was overwhelmed. But as she glanced at the profile of the man beside her, his handsome face illuminated by the passing lights, his focus entirely on the road ahead, she felt something else, a tiny, fragile seed of hope. For the first time since her mother's death, she was not facing the world alone. Her future was no longer a straight, predictable line of struggle. It was a blank page, and Alexander Sterling had just handed her the pen. The story was theirs to write. So, what do you think happened next? Did Chloe find her footing in the glittering, treacherous world of the super-rich? Could a marriage born from strategy and honor ever find a chance at real love? Or were Chloe and Alexander destined to be partners in name only? The story is just beginning. This was the day everything changed. The moment a forgotten promise was kept in the most shocking way imaginable. If you were captivated by Chloe's story and want to find out what happens after they leave the castle, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible drama. Share this video with someone who loves a story where the underdog gets a fighting chance. What would you have done in Chloe's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Your support helps us create more stories like this one.